Assalamu alaikum with you island in 14 kinds of harm from looking at forbidden things. 1. By doing so, a person is disobedient to Allah Almighty. The categorical prohibition of looking at women is based on an explicit order from Allah. Allah Almighty said in His book, meaningful translation, O Muhammad, tell to the believers to lower their gaze. Surah Light 29th ayat, that is, not to look at women. I am a ride of a married woman. The plural of the Arabic word a brother, a boy of small age, of feminine appearance. Therefore he who does not keep his eyes from the forbidden, he contradicts this explicit command of Allah and thereby he commits the offense of haram. Therefore, in order to avoid from looking at the forbidden, it is sufficient to confine oneself to the knowledge that in this transgression is a contradiction to the explicit order, i.e., disobedience to the Almighty Allah. Secondly, he falls into the category of the accursed. Anyone who doesn't keep his eyes open, the curse of the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him in the compilation of the Tushka Tul Masses. Hadith, may the curse of Allah be upon him. The beholder is the one who is being looked at, that is, may Allah curse him who does not keep his eyes from the forbidden and also the one who exposes himself, shows his beauty to others. If looking at the forbidden would be a minor transgression, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, peace and blessings, being the mercy of all creatures, would have cursed these people. From the above we can conclude that this act is extremely hateful to Allah and His Messenger. Peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. Imam Rogue by Swaha did not write his books Muvrada only Uranus that the word curse means distance from Allah's mercy. When someone is away from the favor of Allah, then he is no longer able to keep away from the evil and passions of his soul, because it is possible only to those who are in the shadow of his mercy, as Allah Almighty has said. Semantic translation: verily the soul of man orders evil. Surah Yusuf ayat 53. When who can keep away from both evil and evil? The ayat says, musical note, only the one on whom musical note my Lord has shown mercy, that is, to be in the shadow of His mercy, is the only way to keep away from the evil of the soul and its passions, and this is the only way was determined by the Creator Himself for this soul. Therefore, the soul of a person who is in the shadow of Allah's mercy will stop from ordering evil and will start ordering good for the same reason in the ayat. Semantic translation: Muhammad, tell the believers to lower their eyes, and whether by the shore their genitals. After the words lower their eyes stand, and by the shore do they lower their genitals. The meaning of this is that the one who saved his eyes, who has fallen into the shadow of Allah's mercy because he has obeyed His order, his genitals will be kept from the sin of his wife, that is, musical note. Keeping the genitals from sin is musical note, is the reward for keeping one's gaze away from sin. To look the other way, he who does not keep his eyes from the forbidden, his genitals will not be kept from sin and from sin, and no matter how many curses fall on him. Musical note: curse is not enough for him. Musical note: thirdly, he deserves the wrath and the curse of Allah if anyone says that when he looks at the sight of a beautiful woman, a man's heart certainly overflows with longing and sorrow, but the same thing happens when by the shore you eat your gaze and your heart languishes in ignorance of her appearance. The answer to that man is that the anguish of looking at beauty is much greater, and the suffering of keeping the gaze averted is much less, because he who has seen a beauty has recognized what facial features she has, what eyes, what nose, face like a picture. His anguish over of the beauty he has seen will be much greater, and they will of course only be finally from his chamber, and if one has kept his own eyes, his torment will be based on the beauty he has not seen. His suffering will be light and soon enough. There will be no trace of it. And in return for this suffering he will receive such a sweetness of mano and such a feeling of infinite pleasure from the proximity to the tray that all the pleasures of this universe, put together in comparison to this will seem insignificant to him and vice versa, because of his suffering for the beauty he's seen. A downpour of wrath and the curse of Allah, which causes hearts to overflow with sadness, and sadness does not for a moment receive peace of mind, and the life of man turns into a continuous black streak. So the difference between the two sufferings, as between earth and heaven on the one hand, Allah's favors on one side and his wrath on the other. In other words, the difference between the two suffering is like the difference between heaven and hell. Now looking at all this we can conclude that the order to lower the eyes is actually a great favor of the Almighty Allah for the believers, because, by giving us the suffering of not seeing beauty, He has saved us from suffering from the for beauty seen. If we imagine that one person was bitten by a mosquito and another by a snake, then the one who was the one bitten by the mosquito would thank Allah for keeping him from being bitten by the snake, because the suffering of not seeing beauty is like the bite of a mosquito, and suffering from of beauty seen is like the bite of a snake. Musical note. His fourth heart becomes weak. Musical note when a man does not guard his eyes. Musical note, he is constantly haunted thereafter. The memory of the beautiful woman he's seen, because of this his heart experiences all sorts of more suffering, and this in turn leads to weakening of the heart. The problem with looking at the forbidden is that it contributes to a person's sensory arousal, and it also affects his use all of his body parts. Allah Almighty said, the meaningful translation, verily Allah is aware of what they are. Surah Light 30th ayat. The famous scholar of the Quran in Mamalusi in his tafsir of the Hand of has not, explaining the meaning of this ayat, has emphasized the following three things. Allah Almighty knows how man uses his eyes, how uses his senses, as he uses all parts of his body, which means that Allah knows about man's eyes when he looks at forbidden things, in particular when he casts fiery glances at beautiful women. The use of the senses means that when one looks at a beautiful woman, all of his five senses tend to get their forbidden pleasure. Sight, his eyes want to look at her, his ears want to hear her voice. The organs of taste are seized by the forbidden desire to taste her, that is, to kiss her. Her organs of smell want to savor her wonderful odor. The use of body parts means that the body parts of a man who doesn't run away, his eyes also come in motion, i.e., the hand's many other organs want to get the girl he likes in a sinful way. In a sinful way, the girl he likes. From all this we can conclude that the Almighty Allah knows everything about this man. Sinner knows what's going on with his eyes, his senses and his limbs, but the man in turn doesn't even realize that the great Allah sees him also in Syria. Noted, Allah knows very well what is the ultimate goal of all this, that is, Allah knows that in the end man tends to adultery, and what Allah knows well implies a warning in punishment, that is, I see your sinful deeds. If you don't stop, I will punish you. In other words, this ayat indicates that if this sinner does not repent, he will be punished. Looking at the forbidden is the first step on the road to adultery. And the final stop is the actual committing of this, the act where the shameful places are exposed and the person is covered with shame both in this world and in the hereafter. Allah Almighty has categorically forbidden the first step that leads to this sin, because the sight of the forbidden has a very strong influence. When a person puts his foot on this first step, he automatically reaches the last one. If the beginning of an act is wrong, how can the end be right? That's what one of the poem musical note. Every road that begins with love for of creation leads to sin. If the beginning of anything is wrong, how can there be its right end? All the senses of a man looking at the forbidden, and also all parts of his body come to move his heart for a filthy purpose, will commit musical note adultery. Musical note are in torment for this reason, and for this reason both the body and heart of a sinner subjected to such a stress becomes weak. Health. Swelling of the ovaries do not remove the same musical note. She looks at you, it's bad for your health. Musical note, it causes the ovaries to swell. Swelling of the ovaries, which causes a person to have increased urination. 6. A man gets the disease of rapid ejaculation. Musical note from looking at the forbidden, the fire of passion. Musical note is ignited and its heat reaches musical note. Musical note, the man's semen, as a result of which it musical note becomes liquid, which in turn leads to the disease of rapid ejaculation. And it is known that such a man can no longer fulfill his marital duties properly. For this reason, the spouses begin to quarrel, and the established family life collapses. 7. He becomes ungrateful to Allah for the blessings given to them. The forbidden leads a person to ingratitude. It happens so that, when a man starts looking at different images of women, he stops thinking his wife is beautiful. His heart overflows with ingratitude. I didn't get a beautiful wife, and if your wife is actually beautiful, he shows resentment that he didn't get the prettiest one, and that's because the person who thinks the other woman is more beautiful, he doesn't even like his beautiful wife. So he does not show gratitude for the blessings given to him, but a God-fearing man, because he does not look at other women at all. He considers his wife the most beautiful woman in the world, and thanks to Allah for the favors given to him. 8. Looking at the forbidden also harms sight. Sight is a great gift from Allah. Keeping one's eyes away from the forbidden is a manifestation of gratitude for this good. It is also known that when a person thanks Allah for any good thing given to him, then Allah Almighty increases this good for him, as He said in the Quran, "If you are grateful, I will give you more." Surah Ibrahim, the 7th ayat, and vice versa. To the forbidden is a direct manifestation of not gratitude to Allah. There is a warning about this in the Quran about the severe punishment. Let's hear the semantic translation. If you are ungrateful for the torment. Surah Ibrahim 7:9. His heart dies. The closeness to musical note. Allah Almighty is the greatest musical note. The reward for keeping your eyes open by averting one's eyes from the forbidden suppresses certain feelings, and to overpower his innermost desire to admire this beauty is broken, but in return the great Allah gives him the highest reward of being from among those closest to him. And because of looking at the forbidden, a man is so far removed from Allah that if he would truly realize the extent, he would never have done that. The heart of a man who protects his eyes is constantly turned toward Allah, and because of this he is in proximity to him. If he begins to look at the forbidden, it is as if he turns away from Allah by 180 degrees, and turns his eyes completely towards that beauty. All his thoughts are now on this mortal body that must rot and decay, and there will be no room in his heart, no room for the great Allah. As we know, a heart that does not remember Allah also dies and decays. There are many cases of good Muslims who simply, because of not keeping their eyes open, had a bad course in this life. We ask Allah to protect our iman till our last breath. 10. Don't avert your eyes becomes the reason for not keeping the genitals. Musical note from sinful things. When you look at the forbidden musical note, the flames of the passions are kindled and the person is already musical note is ready to put it out any way he can musical note. So if he can't have the beauty that caused all of this, he blackens his face by intimacy with musical note. Some unbeautiful woman like you musical note burned out on these feelings and how they've cooled down. Musical note born because of a beautiful woman. Musical note cooled down in the arms of a mediocre lady. Musical note in the arms of a mediocre lady. The sight of the forbidden has been produced by a strong musical note, the desire to admire beauty, and in the end musical note, a man blackened his face with a rack that he didn't even want to look at. That is, looking at the forbidden is so vile act that it drives a man to the extreme degree of sin, after which he can no longer distinguish between beauty and ugliness. Also, after looking at the forbidden, it is impossible for the sexual organs to stay married. That's why in the Quran, immediately after lowering their eyes stands and save their genitals. That is, whoever has saved his eyes has saved his genitals, and vice versa. Whoever can't keep his eyes will not be able, can't keep their genitals safe. 11. A man begins to engage in self-satisfaction at the sight of forbidden male semen. Moves out of its place, that is, it comes out of its sack to the outside. 7. And it has the peculiarity that it can't go backwards. Like a car has a reverse speed, but the seed, like milk, doesn't have it. It doesn't musical note backwards in time as you musical note. I only have a way out and there's no way back. Just like a seed, once it leaves its vault, it can't go back. So now, it's bound to come out in some way. In some way, even if it's a forbidden. One of the wrongs done to a man when he looks at the forbidden is that he ceases to distinguish between halal and haram, permissible and forbidden, so he either blackens his face, commits adultery with a certain girl, or humiliate himself by committing adultery with some guy, and if he doesn't succeed, and if he can't do it, he'll probably bring everyone out with his own hand, because as it has been said about the seed, there is no turning back. It's very important to note here that just like adultery with a girl or a guy, with a boy or a girl, is a categorically forbidden to them as a haram act, as well as the very act of gratification with the hand is a very common in the new generation, is also haram. Stern warning that if anyone pleasuring himself with his hand will be pregnant on the day of judgment. It is also mentioned in another hadith that musical note such a person will be cursed. Musical note book 14. Musical note, the harm of looking at the forbidden. Dear viewer, don't forget to give like and subscribe to the channel so that it will to motivate us to make more videos like this, inshallah. And you can also sponsor of this channel by clicking on the button sponsor and give yourself a gift. We'll always be happy to have you. To see you on our channel. Assalamu alaikum wa